Okay, it says recording in progress. So it looks like we are where we need to be. Good morning and welcome. I'm Kathy Wells. I'm president of the Coalition of Little Rock Neighborhoods. And this is our meeting for Saturday, November the 13th with our guest speaker, Ward 1 Director Virgil Miller, who's just new in the post. So we've got a lot of questions lined up for him and what he's going to do for us and what we'd like him to help with. We need to go around the group and introduce ourselves. I'm also a resident of the Downtown Neighborhood Association in the Governor's Mansion Historic District. Ron, tell us your introduction, please.
Ron Muse. I am a co-founder of Forest Hills dating back to 1990. And I have been a longtime leader in this community ever since. I am a 34-year resident of my home in Forest Hills. And I am a representative for Forest Hills with the coalition.
Okay. Norman, tell us about yourself. Introduce yourself.
Hi, Norman Hodges. I'm president of the Heights Neighborhood Association, which I helped found in 2003.
Great. Robert Walker, introduce yourself.
I am Robert Walker, a happy past president of the Capital of Eustis Station Neighborhood Association. And I'm hoping we find somebody else to be president again when Nicole quits doing it. And we've been around a long time too. And I think everybody should join the War Memorial Fitness Center before Bruce Moore notices how much it costs and how little income it generates, because I like Whirlpool.
Those are great things. John Hedrick, introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Kathy. John Hedrick. I'm vice president of the Downtown Neighborhood Association and been here for about 6.5 years. My wife and I chose Little Rock, no ties to Little Rock, no relatives here. Just thought it was a great place to be, and we love downtown Little Rock.
Great. You may not have all quite tuned in to the email I sent last night reminding us, giving the Zoom invitation out again, but I also listed the things that we hope to cover today in our action-packed hour. I'll just read down the list and then we will go back through them. And Virgil may want to have a priority comment that he makes first and second and third. But what we do hope to cover today is public safety issues, police accountability, the accountability card that proposed by the coalition many years ago, which now turns out to be interesting wording repeated very close to the same wording in the new independent audit of the police department, which they are now planning to implement. So it looks like we were prophets ahead of our time on that one. We're also very concerned about the confidentiality independent audit finding that needs to be strengthened and how we might support that goal. I know we've all encountered at certain times and in certain scary crimes, someone commenting that they had information they weren't going to tell the police because they feared their name would not be kept confidential. And it's really important that we work on that, I think. We've got the word boundaries. The map has gone out. What do you see about that? I think Forest Hills has particular interest in that changing line, Ron. So I call your attention to that.
North of 12th Street.
Yes. The city budget and public hearings on same, Virgil. When are you all planning to have those and adopt the budget? Obviously, we always are pursuing strengthening code inspections, dealing with the workload retention of staff. What about city services in regard to rent relief and evictions? What about the Metropolitan Housing Authority remedies to resolve?
Frozen.
Kathy's frozen.
Yeah, we are.
We're not. She is.
Come back, Kathy.
Kathy's in.
Kathy's internet has failed her, sounds like.
Mr. Director, we'll just let you pick a topic and go with it. How about that?
Oh, okay, well, let me say first, thank you for this invitation to come before you and speak. I want to say one thing right up front, and I've shared this with every group that I've gone before at this point, is that I was elected by 9 people, those 9 remaining members of the board. None of those members of the board live in Ward 1. So I was elected by members of the board to be the Ward 1 representative, and none of those people live in Ward 1. And so I think that's important to say, because that would have been the situation with any person elected under the rules that were established for the replacement of Director Hendricks. And so I make no illusions about that I have, you know, all these answers, and I built these relationships, and I ran on the campaign of this or that. I didn't, you guys. I didn't. I had to convince the majority of 9 people to vote for me. And so now that I have accomplished that, the real challenge that I have at this point is to get in front of as many groups as I can that are in Ward 1. I plan on looking, listening, and learning, which is the formula I have used my whole career. Whenever I've joined an organization, I believe it's important to do those 3 things first: look, listen, and learn. And then you can do that 4th thing, that 4th L, which is lead. And so it is extremely important for me to hear what you say, what you have commented on, what you have, what's important to you as an organization and as organizations, to establish that. But I can tell you, I have some observations. I was sworn in on October the 18th, so it hadn't even been a month yet, and I've attended 4 meetings. And someone asked me, well, Director Miller, since you've attended 4 meetings so far, 2 agenda meetings and a board meeting, what do you know, what's your observations? I said, well, these meetings are nasty, they're mean, they're personal, they're hostile, they're contentious. All those nasty, mean things, but quite frankly, I kind of enjoy it a little bit. I don't know what that says about me, but seriously, I think that there's a lot of work to be done as far as building consensus and coalitions, and trying to get just not be so mean-spirited that the public is looking at that, and it's not a good look for Little Rock. It's not a good look for Little Rock, and so
You're taking your ass so slow turns.
Ma'am. Oh, sorry, I thought someone had a
Yeah,
question.
Velma spoke up. Velma, what was the comment?
No, that was, I'm driving, so don't ignore that.
Oh, okay.
Velma,
Well,
it's yours, please.
well, in my my observations have been, and I've been told by some other board members, well, Virgil, you're getting on the board at a very interesting time. We have issues with the police. We have issues with the chief. We have issues with wards. We're getting ready to do budgets. We're talking about change of government. Oh, boy, you've got in at a very exciting, busy time. And so I have a lot of catching up to do. But I can say that it's been interesting at this point. I've reached out to groups who've told me that they just appreciate having their ward director listen to them and give them feedback and establish a relationship. And that's what I want to do. I know that, Director Hendricks was certainly close with a lot of residents and a lot of organizations, and some that she wasn't so much towards. I'm a new person. I have a lot of energy at this point. I think I can meet with everybody at this point. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to meet with everybody and at least get some feedback. So I can certainly give some observations, but what I want to do is I want to be more of an ear and less of a mouth at this point, because I have not established relationships with groups. I've met with at least a half dozen plus already, and I have another meeting this today at noon with Dunbar. I met with them. This will be my second meeting. The South End Neighborhood Group and the East Little Rock Neighborhood Association. All these groups, the Wright Avenue Neighborhood Association that I'm trying to meet with. And of course, John was on a meeting when I was met with the Downtown Little Rock Neighborhood Association. So I'm all ears at this point, but I would be certainly receptive to responding to any type of questions that you have at this point. And just as a side, when the newspapers have called me and the Arkansas Times, and they said, well, Director, what are some things that you'd like to see? And of course, just right off the top, public safety is extremely important to me. Where you live, you want it to be, you want to feel safe. Where you work, and where you play, when your children go off to school. And I have a 16-year-old that goes to Parkview, and we had a scare there a couple of weeks ago, unfounded, but it was still a scare. So public safety is extremely important. Infrastructure is important. Second thing, streets, curbs, gutters, those type things are always important. We need to have infrastructure. And then of course, all things housing. All things housing. I have a passion for that. It's dealing with homelessness, dealing with affordable housing, dealing with weed lots, dealing with the creation of more sustainable type of housing. Those things are important to me. But I think what's important to me needs to be tempered with what I hear from groups like yourselves. And that's the reason that I'm so thankful to get this opportunity to visit with you. Kathy, thank you for giving me this forum. And I certainly want to hear the concerns of the coalition. And I'd like to maybe have a chance to respond to some of those once I hear what, again, I saw the agenda, and I think it's action-packed.
Yes.
Kathy, quite frankly, I'm glad you got cut off, because you were going on, and I was feeling depressed by all the stuff you were concerned about. And so when you got frozen, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, hopefully that's a good sign, because you wasn't stopping. But that just goes to show there are a lot of things that need to be addressed. And it's an exciting time to be on the board. So.
Okay, Robert Warren has his hand up. Thank you, Virgil.
So let's go ahead with your agenda.
Yeah.
Well, I think an important thing is the city is losing that 3/8 of a cent sales tax for the infrastructure. And I think we need to restore or increase that as soon as possible. But I participated in 3 elections so far this year, and I'm a little tired of them.
Robert, you hit the nail right on the head. I've been talking with some of my fellow board members and really talking with the mayor's staff to immediately pivot and try to get the 3/8 at least back for consideration for the voters. It was obvious with the passage of the refinance of the millage for the Little Rock School District. And it was obvious with the passage for the increase in the mills for the Central Arkansas Library System, CALS, that this community is not adverse to paying for things that we want. And so we really need to focus back on that. And certainly when the board was divided on that, 6 for putting that Rebuild the Rock initiative before the voters and 4 against, it makes it difficult. You might recall in 2011, it was unanimous to put the 3/8 before the voters. And I think that's what we have to do. So Robert, you've touched on something that is extremely important to me. I'm trying to work on that as we speak, because the board then, the budget anticipates we will receive another 18 million in American Rescue Fund money. And that money will go towards things on capital improvements that the 3/8 was going for. So just imagine if we still had that 3/8 of a cent, what we could do with that 18 million or so that's coming next year from the American Rescue Plan. We had 18 million this year, a total of 36 million. It's sort of a plug, but that's extremely important. We're trying to work on that, Robert, and trying to get the board members. It's my goal to try to have it be unanimous. And I from the board standpoint, and I think the mayor and his staff realizes that we need to try to get that done as soon as possible.
Question, Virgil, you've got an $11 million rainy day reserve fund. In fact, they just added that final million a month ago at the October board meeting when they reallocated extra funds coming in from sales taxes from internet purchases that folks were making in the community. So what about spending the rainy day fund or part of it? And in fact, that question would also apply to making the restoration funding for the Terry Mansion. The same night they were saying, gee, it's terrible, we've got no Terry Mansion money. They were locking down $1 million or more in the rainy day fund out of the 14 million they had in the kitty to assign to something. And it strikes me as a fair question to ask, why not spend some money to get the Terry Mansion back to what the deed holding stewards are clearly obligated to do? So what about that?
Well, certainly, I think that's a fair question. I've been researching and reading about that as much as what I can. The Terry Mansion is a place that I find near and dear. I probably went there every Saturday, every other Saturday that I had my kids when it was my time to get them as the non-custodial parent. We live on East 9th Street, right across the street from the Art Center and right around the corner from the Decorative Arts Museum. So I love those places. And it breaks my heart to see what's happening at the Decorative Arts Museum. It appears to be a complicated situation that deals with the Art Center Foundation, and with the city. I must confess that I'm not an expert on the arrangements for the upkeep of that. I'm still doing research on that. I heard a report on television last night about what the foundation feels their obligations are. So, Kathy, I'm going to have to drill down to that. That's a question that I am not prepared to answer. But if you were asking me, again, how I feel about the Terry Mansion, I absolutely love the place, and it's breaking my heart that it's going into disrepair. And I will do everything I can to find out the situation and try to, avoid the loss of that beautiful building the way it's going down now.
What about spending the rainy day reserve fund on something, anything, infrastructure?
Yeah, and so when you talk about the rainy day fund, that may be obviously something that the mayor has to certainly lead the way on in a lot of cases with input from the board. I can tell you that I saw here recently before I got on the board that there was an ordinance passed to use funds to address 4 specific wards: Ward 1, Ward 2, Ward 6, some in Ward 7, specific areas. And when you saw the budget that was proposed with a $1.4 million surplus, I'm looking at that and sort of asking the question, is that what we're talking about to address these targeted enhancement funds? And so there appears to be there's always more need than what there are funds for. I can't really address what the parameters are for the rainy day fund. I definitely will have to visit with the mayor and staff to talk about that, and the city manager. That's something that I need to be educated about Kathy, and I'm glad you brought that up. And I made a note about that to ask about the rainy day fund.
All right. Let's talk a little bit more about our housing. Maybe the code inspection program, we noticed they added to the salaries in that October budget adjustment for retention, which we're glad to see, but we've always noted this is an area that had more need than supply in numbers employed and being able to retain the staff that they hired and getting around to the numbers of properties to inspect. So it looks like we need a little bit additional political will. But what are you seeing about the code inspection program?
Well, it is extremely important for me as the Ward 1 director to have a strong code enforcement program. We have the largest ward geographically than any other ward in the city. We have the oldest ward. Therefore, we have probably more housing that needs to be inspected, more dilapidated houses, probably more abandoned housing than any other ward in the city. So I feel strongly that we need a strong, robust code enforcement program. I know that the city manager had put out some proposal years ago or some rule that so many houses would be inspected on a certain rotation. I don't know if that's ever been done to the extent in which they have targeted for. So code enforcement is big for me. Housing is what I consider one of my strongest suits that I bring to the board. And I will be definitely asking more questions about code enforcement and trying to get more code enforcement and trying to see if we can do the things that I know we want to do in that area, particularly here in Ward 1.
What about evictions and rent relief in today's world?
That is wow. I mean, who wants to see somebody get put out of their house when we have funds that can address that? That is certainly a very complicated issue. You all on this call are no stranger to the laws in Arkansas as it relates to tenant rights. I think we are probably 50th in the country as a state when it comes to, or we may be the only state that doesn't have a tenant rights.
We are the only state that still has criminal evictions. Yes. Failed again to lift that in the last session. So that's a worthwhile goal.
Yeah, that
Kathy,
is
Ron has his hand raised.
Thank you. Ron, let's hear your question, please.
It goes back to Robert's concern with the 3/8 that didn't pass last time. I can only speak for myself, but I have heard others say the same thing. The reason it didn't pass is because we kept asking for lots of details about how the money would be spent. And it was kept at a very generalized commenting. And we just felt like that we didn't want to pass. I'm speaking for myself, that until we know precisely how the money will be spent and where.
Ron, I've heard that a lot, and I saw the coalition that was formed against the 3/8. It was a campaign led by Vice Mayor Hines that had a partnership with Arkansas community organizations. The old legacy of Acorn. That was a strange partnership that formed there. But I think it formed, Ron, for the very reasons that you talked about. There was not enough specifics in that. There was not enough detail that people were comfortable with. I think it is not ideal to go before the voters when your board is not 100% unanimous with regard to pushing that before the voters. And so that it was certainly a challenge from that standpoint, and it was challenged, Ron, from this. I've heard the same things you've heard. And even though I was a member and all, you know, in the interest of fair disclosure, I was on the mayor's team to campaign for that because it did have some very good things in it that I wanted to see done. But I understand the voters have spoken. It went down 2-1. To me, Ron, when something gets beat 66%, that's a wake-up call. And so I think the administration should have immediately pivoted to reach out, to address the concerns, to say we have heard the voters loud and clear, and that we will come back with something that the voters can support, because obviously the voters in our community are not afraid to support the organizations and things that they feel like they can with enough detail. Little Rock School District and CALS being the other. So, Ron, I'm right on that. I hear you, and that's what I want to do.
Norman, your hand.
Well, and I can follow up with that because I cannot tell you how many people were just sort of outraged at $30 million for a giraffe exhibit. I mean, that was just when we've got drainage issues, water issues, streets and everything that people were just could not believe anybody wanted to spend that much money for an exhibit. I grant you the zoo is sort of a statewide situation here because nobody else has it in Arkansas. But I think that was just one of the major factors in its defeat. So,
yeah, I think that was probably not the thing that should have been highlighted with that. I think, again, going back to more specifics, but highlighting some of the things that was highlighted, the campaign that was run. I think, Norm, there's a lot of there's a lot of after discussion going on, I think, by certainly those who favored that rebuild the rock tax. The post-mortem on that is still going on. And I think people are waking up trying to determine, man, what really happened. And there was certainly, whatever polling they had, obviously wasn't right. Obviously was not right. And so we have to go back to the drawing board. Like I said, I think it should have been a wake-up call to the supporters of Rebuild the Rock, that the voters want something else. And so we really need to address that. And I'm glad this is exactly what I need to hear from you as far as your feelings about that, because I'm going to share those with the administration as I'm trying to work with other board members to try to determine what's the earliest we can put before the board. Before the board, this 3/8 proposal again, which will now be a new tax. It's not a renewal; it'll be a new tax, and so it has to be approached from that standpoint. To get the board then to say, let's put this before the voters, but the board has got to be on the same page. And to me, it has to be a unanimous effort, and it can't be split the way it was with this Rebuild the Rock, in my
Talk
opinion.
to us just a minute about this indoor sports complex proposal. I kept pursuing research on that, and they never made it public or in writing where they would locate it. The researchers whose analysis we got and circulated said that there were several prospective locations. War Memorial Park would have been the best one, but they said, and I quote now, it was a real challenge to find a location to put a building 100,000 square foot plus in size, plus parking. And then I would hear but nobody would say it on the record. Well, they're going to put it in that downtown park where that ramp comes up from Highway 10 to the I-30. And then I would hear, well, there's not enough space there for that. And then I would hear, well, they're talking about East Little Rock, which certainly has enough acreage you might turn to such an event. But that is one of those things that would operate a few days a year, would require a city subsidy because there's no pretense that it pays for itself. And it seems to be that we're seeking to take this away from other cities like North Little Rock and Fort Smith that are already in this activity. Is this really the best thing that Little Rock should be pursuing? What's your view on the indoor sports complex?
I think it gets right back to what, John was talking about. It lacks specifics. I mean, how can you really have to have detail to tell people specifically where everything is going? And I think that was probably one of the major flaws in this Rebuild the Rock. Not enough specifics. Like Norm said, they were certainly touting the giraffe exhibit. I mean, that was one thing they were leading with that. And I don't think that was well received. I just don't think that was just not well received. I think what should have been more pushed forward with this is, Kathy, what you're saying. Where is this complex going to be? Just where is it going to be? Not that if you're going to support it or not. I mean, we would need to have some details about it. Just tell us where it's going to be, what's going to be located, then let us make up our mind as voters if we want to vote for something like that. But you're asking us to vote for something like that, and then you're not even telling us where it's going to be, and we got all these questions that can't be answered. That's the very thing that Ron was talking about. That's the very thing that Norm was talking about. That's the very thing that you're talking about. It lacked specifics. It lacked, you had this tree, but you didn't, where the branch is going to be. And so it did not have enough detail. It was just not well received. And you were leading with the giraffe. It was just, like I said, I think they're going to post-mortem on it, Kathy. It's probably not pretty. I would think that the brain trust, the people that were polling and thinking that they had a majority, have probably got to look in the mirror and ask a whole lot of questions. I think there's certainly, a lot of discussion that has to be had about that. But again, my focus at this point, since I've been on the board, is to try to bring before the board something that they want to bring before the voters. Again, being that 3/8 that we're used to it, but the campaign for it is going to be a little different because it's not going to be a renewal. It's going to be a new tax because it's getting ready to end at the end of this year. And we're going to have to say it's a new tax coming forward. But I think the voters in 2011 and people will support things that have the specifics and can answer the questions, Kathy, that you just asked. They will support things, or if they get the detail, well, no, we can't support that. Let's do something else. But put all this before the voters, give them the specifics like what we had in 2011. Let's get a majority of the board, unanimous consent from the board for this. And let's put this back before the voters. This creates a hole in our city services and our capital improvements that we have not had, you guys, in 10 years. We have not had this in 10 years. What we're getting ready to experience come January 1, 2022 with that 3/8 gone. So.
I appreciate that. You talked about one of your housing concerns related to the homeless community. Have you more detail on that?
I have not, but I can tell you that being homeless is not a crime. Being homeless is not a crime. And sometimes I think we want to criminalize it in some regards. Of course, you guys know I'm a longtime resident downtown, and we just built a new house downtown, a couple of blocks from Philander Smith. I'm a neighbor of Kathy Wells, you guys, if that says anything about me. But I've had, Father Time, Randy, Santa Claus, whoever you guys want to call him, trying to sleep on our porch at night. And I tell Randy, you can't do that. I've had people at midnight come pull on our door and ring our doorbell. But I've read about these people, thankfully through the network that has been established, that reports criminal activity and reports things. So I knew these folks. So I wasn't, that shocked that some of this happened, but it's tough when people don't have the services that you need. And I certainly don't want to call the police on a homeless person, but I got a wife and I have a 16-year-old who aren't comfortable with Randy coming and pulling on the door at 10 in the morning, or some lady pulling on our door at midnight. I'm not comfortable with it either, quite frankly. And so I don't have a lot of specifics. I do know that it should be a priority, and I do know that it's nothing new, and all cities have to deal with it. And quite frankly, we can put a lot of services into our homeless shelters and our outreach services towards the homeless. But, mental illness, I think, is something that has to be top when it comes to addressing that. And quite frankly, guys, some people don't want to go to a shelter, as you know. So shelters have to be innovative. They have to be some that people have pets, they can take their pets. There's a lot of things that we can do and what we're trying to do, but I'm going to be focused on that and looking at best practices that we have throughout the country that work. But if somebody has a solution for the homeless situation in our city, please raise your hand. I'm all ears. If any of you guys got some more ideas, I'm here to listen. If John, Norm, or Mary, and even Kathy, I'm here to listen. If you think there's some things that we need to be doing as a city that we have not done at this point. I think we lost Kathy again. But I did want to talk a little bit about, and I wanted Kathy to tell me a little bit more about confidentiality. I need to learn a little bit more about that because that's something that, quite frankly, I didn't know a lot about until Kathy brought the issue up.
Kathy's coming back in now. I think you can address her now.
Kathy?
I just dropped off.
No, that's fine. I said one thing that I was not familiar with.
Totally. Oh dear, y'all continue. Good.
Yeah, that you brought to my attention, and that was confidentiality. Tell me a little bit more about that and what we need to do to address that.
I would certainly welcome folks to weigh in on this, and I'll circulate a fresh email asking folks for their specific remedies. I know that independent audit, and you've got a copy of that, right? Don't you, Mr. Miller? Okay.
Oh, absolutely. We went over it, and I think it was interesting, Kathy, but I didn't realize it was a citizen-led committee that came up with all of the things that they were addressing. I saw one of the members of that committee was one of our neighbors, Karen Buchanan, Ollie Neal's wife.
Well, I think interviewed a lot of folks, but the independent auditor folks from out of state were a professional review group. And then the names on the implementation committee are all on the police department employment chain of command at one point or the other. And one of the things we wanted to bring to your attention is there seems to be no announced way the public can continue to contribute to bringing about what that audit recommended be done. And one of the points that clearly the public needs most to take part in is a system that strengthens confidentiality that's going to enable folks to once again tell police critical information.
So that's an issue that it hadn't been. Confidentiality is something that has been lacking.
It has been terribly lacking. And I would encourage you to start visiting with that question as you make your rounds. Do your folks, when you're talking to a neighborhood leader, say, will your folks report suspicious activity to the police? Will they be a witness to a crime? Is there a way that they can feel confident that their reports will be kept confidential, and then see what they tell you?
Okay.
Let me really encourage that. And we need to be thinking amongst ourselves what standard we might find that's successful. Yes, for years there's been Crime Stoppers, a phone line that can be confidential, but that's a small percentage of how the body of police investigating all these numerous crime complaints pursue getting information from the public to get the evidence to make an arrest and to prosecute someone for a crime. And the sad truth is they will not generally speak to an officer without some personal relationship of some period of time. And so maybe there's some technology that we can find that assures anonymity. But it's going to come down to people sooner rather than later.
Yes.
And how you build that willingness to tell and that assurance that names will be kept confidential needs to be very thoroughly shook out, held up for public scrutiny, some policy proposed, and public comment time announced. The transparency, of course, is a big part of the background for all of government these days and for the police in general. And there was a spring community policing upgrade workshop that I took part in. These were issues there. And one of the points that we made, which fits with the audit conclusions of the fall, is go on and put up on the police department website page the policy manual of how they train an officer to conduct their actions in the city of Little Rock. What's the policy on? How about use of force? What's the policy on taking a complaint from a citizen against an officer for some wrongdoing? Right now, you may not know, if someone complains against Officer Unfriendly, let's say, Officer Unfriendly is told whether it's founded or not. The individual making the complaint will be told, but there's no record. There's no annual report that we had 50 complaints. We found that all of them were unfounded, which, by the way, seems to be the pattern, or that we found there was a valid complaint and we retrained the officer. There was a valid complaint and we took other discipline against the officer. There was a valid complaint and we terminated the officer. We weren't talking about names, but we were talking about how do you handle your complaints, and give us an annual report of the numbers and the resolutions. And on a big question of use of force, post that policy out there separately, but have a searchable policy manual, and maybe declare we're going to take up use of force, which they probably always do regularly. And for the next 45 days, we're going to take comments from the public. Here is our website. Here is the email, just like all these other drop-down comments for public stuff. And then they go forward and they deal with it. And the technology is certainly there to post in a very thick policy manual, searchable by chapters and keywords, and to take comments back. So I would encourage you to ask about that and see what you might lend your support to.
Well, I'm real anxious to read the results of the audit other police department practices, which have been going on for years. I found it surprising that when an officer or candidate is having an appraisal, that there are 20 different criteria that a person can use to evaluate that person being appraised, and they get to choose which ones they use. So that theoretically means everybody could be appraised on a different set of criteria. That was shocking to me, and that certainly needs to be addressed. And so I'm looking forward to the things that this audit report
It's a little loose, yes.
sort of clean up. And one of the things it talked about was complaints and the disproportionate number of complaints that come from certain different demographics. And there appears to be, based on national trends, a lack of reporting on that. So I think, Kathy, the audit of the police department is well overdue, is needed. And there'll be some things that will have to be addressed when that comes out.
It's out. You realize that. This is
Yeah,
out.
but the audit is out, but the group that's going to take action on that and put together a plan on that was appointed by the police chief, and is made up of the rank and file of the police department. So the audit is out, but that's just like having a report and then putting it on a shelf and it gathers dust. No, this report is out, and the people that the mayor announced that he's going to have this committee review all of the recommendations and come up with a plan for implementation of those to present to the board. So that's what I'm looking for. The report itself, yeah, you're right, it's out, and it showed a whole lot of things that I think were surprising to a whole lot of people.
Well, you're in a position to ask for monthly updates, are you not?
Yes, no doubt. And one of the things that the CNN, the auditors reported or recommended, that there be an independent audit. An independent review of the implementation by a third party. That's one thing I brought up at the board meeting, and I'm not sure if I articulated that right, because then they were talking about this committee that's going to be appointed, but I was talking about something totally different from the committee, and I will get back on that, because I think that recommendation from the group about having a third party review the implementation is what I was talking about.
Have you had a chance to find out what has been done in other cities where this group has done audits?
I have not. But this group is nationally known, and that will be part of the due diligence when I take a look at that.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see these folks have done it in other cities and how other cities carry out the audit activities.
I agree.
Ron has his hand raised.
Ron, please, what's your question? Ron, unmute yourself. Ron.
Considering the high numbers of homicides in our city, reaching heights that we haven't seen in a long time, what contribution would you make, Rector, to the resolution of this situation, this phenomenon?
Well, one of the things is more community-oriented policing. And that can be in the form of a lot of different things, a lot of intervention, prevention, and treatment type programs. I can tell you, Ron, that as a youth, living in the city, and I lived in East Bay, Berkeley, California. I was one of those kids as a youth that was on that path. Why was I on that path? This is what my friends were doing. I didn't have a lot of alternatives. When I was going to the after school program, which is sort of like this concept of community schooling, that gave me a lot to do, and that kept me out of trouble. Quite frankly, to be totally frank with you guys, when we moved from Berkeley, California to Wrightsville, Arkansas, that probably saved my life. It ain't no probably it did. Youth in the 60s in that environment, my friends were not good people. And I wanted to be just like them. And I was doing stuff that I shudder to think as an adult I did as a youth. But moving here when I was 13 years old saved my life. So I know what programs and intervention can do in the lives of youth. I remember sharing that story to some young men over on 21st Street during the height of the gang violence there in 92, 91, 90, the early 90s. And the guy just looked at me. He was like, Ron, he was about maybe 10 years old or something. And he said, well, Mr. Miller, you moved. You moved. And he was right. He was absolutely right. They are stuck in this environment. They can't move. And so we've got to find some kind of ways to intervene with that, to give some of these children some alternatives and some things to do, because if they don't see it, they can't be it. And if they're in that environment and they're wanting to be like their friends, like what I wanted to be, like my friend, it leads to be like my friends, it leads to this type of thing. So we've got to intervene. We've got to have programs, and that's one way to try to address it. Certainly having better relationships with the police is another way, but man, just having mentors and people that I looked up to when I was going to that community-oriented school. His name was Leo. I don't even know what the guy's last name was, but he was somebody I admired, and he kept me off the streets. But when he wasn't around and I didn't have that, I wanted to be like my thug friends. And that was just part of the environment. And moving to Arkansas, to Wrightsville, Arkansas, on a house on a highway with no streets, curbs, nothing. It changed my whole life. But people can't do that, Ron.
Well, how about improving the environment in which these individuals live instead of telling them to move?
I'm with you 100%. And so that's where we've got to improve those environments. We've got to get away from these abandoned housing where people could be a haven for crime, or houses that turn into drug houses, or places where we know criminal activity is taking place, that we can try to clean that up. I'm with you 100%, Ron, to try to clean that up as much as possible. So it's important, quite frankly, that we get Thrasher's Boys Club back online there at 33rd and around Art Street, because it's down now. And those kids, that Thrasher saved a whole lot of kids' lives from going into otherwise negative type of activities when they had something positive to do. I'm with you 100%. I believe we have to change the environments. One of the things, we have to bring that boys club back online.
Point of information, folks, and Virgil Miller, are you all following the spring workshop upgrades proposed for the community policing program, with an emphasis starting in a pilot program? They're very careful to talk about go slow and get it right, and then find what works in Little Rock from some national models, and then expand it out. And they were talking about school resource officers, and they were talking about along John Barrow. And this community policing upgrade, once again, with some experts from the national pool of talent, had really excellent operations. I was privileged to be a citizen participant in these workshops in May. And so far as I can tell, because of one distraction after another, nothing has been done about this laudable plan. Are you familiar with this plan? Shall I send you a copy of it?
I'm not familiar with it. Please send me a copy.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with
that. I want to just remind folks, I sent you a few emails about this since May when I participated. Everything that Roger Miller's just talked about is addressed in the plan. So we've got some very thoughtful conclusions that in that case were reached by a combination of police at all levels of the command staff and officers working with the folks on the street and citizens. And some of their biggest critics that were there in the meeting hall that day. It was a very laudable collection that were brought together, very well handled by the speakers. But let me get that to you.
Thank you.
Did someone else have a hand up? I think I missed somebody. Well, Mr. Norman, tell us your question. Yes, Norman.
Mr. Miller, did I understand you to say that the review of the police department, the report that's now in, is going to be considered and with recommendations coming from a group that was entirely made up of police personnel?
Yeah, he did. It is.
I'm terribly sorry, but that just seems a little bit self-involved.
That's why the recommendation for this third party, to me, I thought and I'm gonna have to read this thing again. I thought that was what the audit team was recommending, that this third party look at the implementation, but I guess the mayor felt like maybe there was another part that came before that, and have the police take a look at some recommendations. I feel a little like you, Norman, on that. I've got to do a little more about that. It was almost, I'm sure it's not well, I'm going to reserve until I read that again, but I really wanted to, that's why I brought out this third party that the auditors recommended, but that seemed to get no traction. And I think that I didn't articulate it, Norman, the way I should have. I'm going to revisit that and articulate that in a little bit more stronger, a little bit more direct way. That even if they do have these internal staff doing, looking at how these recommendations should be implemented, this other group will say hasn't been implemented at all. Or, I mean, this is a report on it. You paid us to do this. We can tell you what has and hadn't been done. I think that's what I heard, what I read from the audit, but when that was picked internally to review the stuff, I kind of felt a certain way about that.
Well, I mean, I can understand if you want the police to look at it and develop policies to implement things. But once they've done that, there needs to be an outside entity reviewing both the report and the work done then for implementation, et cetera, by the department. That seems to be a reasonable sort of way to approach it. So.
And Norm, I think that's the way it's set up. I think that's exactly the way it's set up. I just didn't hear enough, like probably you, about the independent party. I didn't hear that, but I think that just the way you described it, the police being involved with, putting these recommendations into place, and then the third party reviewing and seeing if it's been done. I believe that's the way it's set up. And
we just haven't heard that third part yet then.
The third party has not been, I didn't hear a lot of amen and going on when I brought up that third party deal with that recommendation. I didn't hear that, and maybe that was my fault, and I didn't hear that clearly, but I will ask that question again, because I think that is an integral part of this thing if it's going to be successful or not.
Well, that makes sense to us.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. It makes sense to me.
We're closing in on the end of our hour together. I didn't want to close off without asking your reaction to the troubles at the Metropolitan Housing Authority and what you would do to remedy that.
I think it's a mess over there. I think it's an absolute mess. I'm just like you guys, I've heard the old saying, and I believe in it, where there's smoke, there's fire. There seems to be a whole lot of smoke coming out of there from every executive director that they've had on an interim basis. I think HUD needs to take control of that to the extent whatever the city has to do to take control of that. There is a pending lawsuit from a previous director who is 200 plus pages with documentation. I think obviously that needs to play out, but I can tell you from a citizen looking at that and now a director, I still feel the same way, that something needs to be done with that, and it may need to start at the governing board level.
That's an appointment of you directors. So what would you directors do about your appointees?
It's an appointment of the mayor that then is ratified by the board. And so that's a discussion I need to have. I think everyone wants to have with the mayor. I think the mayor has articulated some things about it. And there appears to be some action, some washing of hands. I can't tell if it's the mayor or is it HUD. Somebody needs to take control. And so if it's on our end, I'm going to push with that a little bit more, but I really think that from what I've seen, that it needs to start at the governing board level, because there's been too many executive directors that have said the same thing.
All right, thank you for that. We have any other topics, any other questions from anyone here? Okay, we've kind of worked over our list, Director Miller. Thank you so much. Oh, city budget. Are we got public hearing dates on city budget?
There will be. I will send that out to you, Kathy, on a link. I may have sent it to you, call myself sending it, but if I hadn't, I'll make sure you get it and you can share with the group.
That sounds good. We care about the budget.
Yeah, we do too. I think the budget discussion, as I told the mayor after I got it, I said, Mayor, I'm not used to getting a budget in November that has to be approved by the end of the year. I recall that when you first took office, you started this whole process, I think in September or so, and it was well received. So it, for whatever reason, was pandemic or whatever, I feel rushed. I feel extremely rushed to try to get up to speed on something that it was just presented to me this month, to have it approved by the end of the year. But I'm in the same boat as the rest of the directors, and we'll just have to try to get it done.
Well, you're right, it's been compressed. You go back some years and it not only started earlier, but they would have the briefings and there would be more time between one discussion and the next, one retreat, and then taking up segments of it week to week to week to week. And there would be ample communication with the public. They would post these on the website. In fact, let me encourage you to go on the city website as a citizen might and see if you can find a budget proposal or the briefing that you folks received. I think you will find that it's hard to find if it's there at all. It may not be there at all. And this is stuff that it should not be that technically difficult to get out there. So I submit that for a request to address.
Well, thank you. I agree with that. It should be out there for the public. It may be out there. But I know the dates are set up for public review.
Great. Once again, thank you for your appearance with us today. We look forward to a continuing dialogue and coming into the individual neighborhood associations. We will now conclude the recording of this meeting.